Edme Castaing, born at Alencon in 1796, was the youngest of the three sons of an inspector general in the Department of Woods and Forests. His elder brother had entered the same service as his father. The other brother was a staff captain of engineers. Without being wealthy, the family, consisting of Monsieur and Madame Castaing and 4 children, was in comfortable circumstances. The young Edme was educated at the College of Angers, where, intelligent and hardworking, he carried off many prizes. He decided to enter the medical profession and at the age of 19 commenced his studies at the School of Medicine in Paris. For 2 years, he worked hard and well, living within the modest allowance made him by his father. At the end of that time, this young man of 2 or 23 formed a passionate attachment for a lady, the widow of a judge and the mother of 3 children. Of the genuine depth and sincerity of this passion for a woman who must have been considerably older than himself, there can be no doubt. Henceforth, the one object in life to Castaing was to make money enough to relieve the comparative poverty of his adored mistress and place her and her children beyond the reach of want. In 1821, Castaing became a duly qualified doctor, and by that time had added to the responsibilities of his mistress and himself by becoming the father of 2 children whom she had brought into the world. The lady was exigent, and Castaing found it difficult to combine his work with a due regard to her claims on his society, nor was work plentiful or lucrative. To add to his embarrassments, Castaing, in 1818, had backed a bill for a friend for 600 francs. To meet it when it fell due 2 years later was impossible, and desperate were the efforts made by Castaing and his mother to put off the day of reckoning. His father, displeased with his son's conduct, would do nothing to help him, but his mother spared no effort to extricate him from his difficulties. She begged a highly placed official to plead with the insistent creditor, but all in vain. There seemed no hope of a further delay when suddenly in the October of 1822, Castaing became the possessor of 100,000 francs. How he became possessed of this considerable sum of money forms part of a strange and mysterious story. Among the friends of Castaing were 2 young men of about his own age, Auguste and Hippolyte Ballet. Auguste the elder had the misfortune a few days after his birth to incur his mother's lasting dislike. The nurse had let the child fall from her arms in the mother's presence, and the shock had endangered Madame Ballet's life. From that moment, the mother took a strong aversion to her son. He was left to the charge of servants. His meals were taken in the kitchen. As soon as he was 5 years old, he was put out to board elsewhere, while his brother Hippolyte and his sister were well cared for at home. The effect of this unjust neglect on the character of Auguste Ballet was, as may be imagined, bad. He became indolent and dissipated. His brother Hippolyte, on the other hand, had justified the affectionate care bestowed on his upbringing. He had grown into a studious, intelligent youth of a refined and attractive temperament. Unhappily, early in his life, he had developed consumption, a disease he inherited from his mother. As he grew older, his health grew steadily worse until, in 1822, his friends were seriously alarmed at his condition. It became so much graver that, in the August of that year, the doctors recommended him to take the waters at Enghien. In September, he returned to Paris apparently much better, but on October 2nd, he was seized with sudden illness, and 3 days later, he was dead. A few years before the death of Hippolyte, his father and mother had died almost at the same time. Monsieur Ballet had left to each of his sons a fortune of some 260,000 francs. Though called to the bar, both Auguste and Hippolyte Ballet were now men of independent means. After the death of their parents, whatever jealousy Auguste may have felt at the unfair preference which his mother had shown for her younger son had died down. At the time of Hippolyte's death, the brothers were on good terms, though the more prudent Hippolyte disapproved of his elder brother's extravagance. Of Hippolyte Ballet, Dr. Castaing had become the fast friend. Apart from his personal liking for Castaing, it was a source of comfort to Hippolyte, in his critical state of health, to have as his friend one whose medical knowledge was always at his service. About the middle of August 1822, Hippolyte, on the advice of his doctors, went to Enghien to take the waters. There, Castaing paid him frequent visits. He returned to Paris on September 22nd and seemed to have benefited greatly by the cure. On Tuesday, October 1st, he saw his sister, Madame Martignon, and her husband. He seemed well, but said that he was having leashes applied to him by his friend Castaing. On the Wednesday evening, his sister saw him again and found him well and with a good appetite. On the Thursday, after a night disturbed by severe attacks of vomiting, his condition seemed serious. His brother-in-law, who visited him, found that he had taken to his bed. His face was swollen, his eyes were red. His sister called in the evening, but could not see him. The servants told her that her brother was a little better but resting, and that he did not wish to be disturbed. They said that Dr. Castaing had been with him all day. On Friday, Castaing himself called on the Martignons and told them that Hippolyte had passed a shockingly bad night. Madame Martignon insisted on going to nurse her brother herself, but Castaing refused positively to let her see him. The sight of her, he said, would be too agitating to the patient. At 8 o'clock that evening, the Martignons learned that Hippolyte was better, but at 10 o'clock they received a message that he was dying and that his brother Auguste had been sent for. Madame Martignon was prostrated with grief, but her husband hastened to his brother-in-law's house. There he found Castaing, who said that the death agony of his friend was so dreadful that he had not the strength to remain in the room with the dying man. Another doctor was sent for, but at 10 o'clock the following morning, after protracted suffering, Hippolyte Ballet passed away. A post-mortem was held on his body. It was made by Doctors Segalas and Castaing. They stated that death was due to pleurisy, aggravated by the consumptive condition of the deceased, which, however serious, was not of itself likely to have been so rapidly fatal in its consequences. Hippolyte had died, leaving a fortune of some 240,000 francs. In the previous September, he had spoken to the notary Lebray, a former clerk of his father's, of his intention of making a will. He had seen that his brother Auguste was squandering his share of their inheritance. He told Lebray that whatever he might leave to Auguste should not be placed at his absolute disposal. To his servant Victoire, during his last illness, Hippolyte had spoken of a will he had made, which he wished to destroy. If Hippolyte had made such a will, did he destroy it before his death? In any case, no trace of it was ever found after his death. He was presumed to have died intestate, and his fortune was divided, 3/4 of it going to his brother Auguste, the remaining quarter to his sister, Madame Martignon. On the day of Hippolyte's death, Auguste Ballet wrote from his brother's house to one Prignon.
With great grief I have to tell you that I have just lost my brother. I write at the same time to say that I must have 100,000 francs today if possible. I have the greatest need of it. Destroy my letter and reply at once. Monsieur Sandry will, I am sure, accommodate me. I am at my poor brother's house, from which I am writing.
Prignon did as he was asked, but it was 2 days before the stockbroker Sandry could raise the necessary sum. On October 7th, he sold out sufficient of Auguste's stock to realize 100,000 francs, and the following day gave Prignon an order on the Bank of France for that amount. The same day, Prignon took the order to Auguste. Accompanied by Castaing and Jean, Auguste's servant, Auguste and Prignon drove to the bank. There, the order was cashed. Prignon's part of the business was at an end. He said goodbye to Auguste outside the bank. As the latter got into his cabriolet carrying the bundle of notes, Prignon heard him say to Castaing,
"There are the 100,000 francs.
Why had Auguste Ballet, after his brother's death, such urgent need of 100,000 francs? If the statements of Auguste made to other persons are to be believed, he had paid the 100,000 francs which he had raised through Prignon to Lebray, his father's former clerk, who would seem to have acted as legal and financial advisor to his old master's children. According to Auguste's story, his sister Madame Martignon had offered Lebray 80,000 francs to preserve a copy of a will made by Hippolyte, leaving her the bulk of his fortune. Castaing, however, had ascertained that Lebray would be willing, if Auguste would outbid his sister and pay 100,000 francs, to destroy the will, so that, Hippolyte dying intestate, Auguste would take the greater part of his brother's fortune. Auguste agreed to accept Lebray's terms, raised the necessary sum, and handed over the money to Castaing, who in turn gave it to Lebray, who had thereupon destroyed the copy of the will. Castaing, according to the evidence of Auguste's mistress, an actress of the name of Persily, had spoken in her presence of having himself destroyed one copy of Hippolyte's will before his death, and admitted having arranged with Lebray after Hippolyte's death for the destruction of the other copy. How far was the story told by Auguste and repeated in somewhat different shape by Castaing to other persons true? There is no doubt that after the visit to the Bank of France with Prignon on October 8th, Auguste and Castaing drove together to Lebray's office. The servant said that on arriving there, one of them got out of the cab and went up to Lebray's house, but which of the two he would not at first say positively. Later he swore that it was Auguste Barlet. Whatever happened on that visit to Lebray's, and it was the theory of the prosecution that Castaing and not Auguste had gone up to the office. The same afternoon, Auguste Barlet showed his mistress the seals of the copy of his brother's will, which Lebray had destroyed, and told her that Lebret all through the business had refused to deal directly with him and would only act through the intermediary of Castaing. Did Lebret, as a fact, receive the 100,000 francs? A close examination of his finances showed no trace of such a sum. Castaing, on the other hand, on October 10, 1822, had given a stockbroker a sum of 66,000 francs to invest in securities. On the 11th of the same month he had lent his mother 30,000 francs, and on the 14th had given his mistress 4,000 francs. Of how this large sum of money had come to Castaing at a time when he was practically insolvent, he gave various accounts. His final version was that in the will destroyed by Auguste, Hippolyte Barlet had left him an income for life equivalent to a capital of 100,000 francs, and that Auguste had given him that sum out of respect for his brother's wishes. If that explanation were true, it was certainly strange that shortly after his brother's death, Auguste Barlet should have expressed surprise and suspicion to a friend on hearing that Castaing had been buying stock to the value of 8,000 francs. If he had given Castaing 100,000 francs for himself, there was no occasion for surprise or suspicion at his investing 8,000. That Auguste had paid out 100,000 francs to someone in October, the state of his finances at his death clearly proved. According to the theory of the prosecution, Auguste believed that he had paid that money to Lebray through the intermediary of Castaing and not to Castaing himself, hence his surprise at hearing that Castaing, whom he knew to be impecunious, was investing such a sum as 8,000 francs. No money had ever reached Lebray. His honesty and good faith were demonstrated beyond any shadow of a doubt. No copy of any will of Hippolyte Barlet had ever been in his possession. But Castaing had shown Auguste Barlet a copy of his brother's will, the seals of which Auguste had shown to his mistress. In all probability, and possibly at the instigation of Castaing, Hippolyte Barlet had made a will, leaving the greater part of his property to his sister. Somehow or other, Castaing had got possession of this will. On his death, Castaing had invented the story of Madame Martignon's bribe to Lebray, and so persuaded Auguste to outbid her. He had ingeniously kept Auguste and Lebray apart by representing Lebray as refusing to deal direct with Auguste, and by these means had secured to his own use the sum of 100,000 francs, which Auguste believed was being paid to Lebray as the price of his alleged destruction of his brother's will. The plot was ingenious and successful. To Lebray and the Martignon-Castaing said that Hippolyte had made a will in Madame Martignon's favor, but had destroyed it himself some days before his death. The Martignons expressed themselves as glad that Hippolyte had done so, for they feared lest such a will should have provoked resentment against them on the part of Auguste. By keeping Auguste and Lebray apart, Castaing prevented awkward explanations. The only possible danger of discovery lay in Auguste's incautious admissions to his mistress and friends, but even had the fact of the destruction of the will come to the ears of the Martignons, it is unlikely that they would have taken any steps involving the disgrace of Auguste. Castaing had enriched himself considerably by the opportune death of his friend Hippolyte. It might be made a matter of unfriendly comment that, on the first day of May preceding that sad event, Castaing had purchased 10 grains of acetate of morphia from a chemist in Paris, and on September 18th, less than a month before Hippolyte's death, he had purchased another 10 grains of acetate of morphia from the same chemist. Castaing's position relative to Auguste Barlet was now a strong one. They were accomplices in the unlawful destruction of Hippolyte's will. Auguste believed it to be in his friend's power to ruin him at any time by revealing his dealings with Lebray. But more than that to Auguste, who believed that his 100,000 francs had gone into Lebret's pocket, Castaing could represent himself as so far unrewarded for his share in the business. Lebret had taken all the money, while he had received no recompense of any kind for the trouble he had taken and the risk he was encountering on his friend's behalf. Whatever the motive, from fear or gratitude, Auguste Ballet was persuaded to make a will leaving Dr. Edme Castaing the whole of his fortune, subject to a few trifling legacies. But Auguste's feelings towards his sole legatee were no longer cordial. To one or two of his friends, he expressed his growing distaste for Castaing's society. At the end of May 1823, Castaing consulted a cousin of his, Malassis, a notary's clerk, as to the validity of a will made by a sick man in favor of his medical attendant. He said that he had a patient gravely ill who, not wishing to leave his money to his sister, whom he disliked, intended to leave it to him. Malassis reassured him as to the validity of such a will and gave him the necessary instructions for preparing it. On May 29th, Castaing sent Malassis the will of Auguste Ballet, with the following note: "I send you the will of Monsieur Ballet, examine it and keep it as his representative." The will was dated December 1st, 1822, and made Castaing sole legatee. On the same day that the will was deposited with Malassis, Castaing and Auguste Ballet started together on a little 2 days trip into the country. To his friends, Auguste seemed in the best of health and spirits, so much so that his housekeeper remarked as he left how well he was looking, and Castaing echoed her remark, saying that he looked like a prince. During the afternoon, the two friends visited Saint-Germain, then returned to Paris, and at 7 o'clock in the evening arrived at the Tête Noire Hotel at Saint-Cloud, where they took a double-bedded room, Castaing paying 5 francs in advance. They spent the following day, Friday, May 30th, in walking about the neighborhood, dined at the hotel at 7, went out again and returned about 9 o'clock. Soon after their return, Castaing ordered some warmed wine to be sent up to the bedroom. It was taken up by one of the maidservants. 2 glasses were mixed with lemon and sugar, which Castaing had brought with him. Both the young men drank of the beverage. Auguste complained that it was sour and thought that he had put too much lemon in it. He gave his glass to the servant to taste, who also found the drink sour. Auguste spent a bad night, suffering from internal pains, and in the morning his legs were so swollen that he could not put on his boots. Castaing got up at 4 o'clock that morning and asked one of the servants to let him out. 2 hours later, he drove up in a cabriolet to the door of a chemist in Paris and asked for 12 grains of tartar emetic, which he wanted to mix in a wash according to a prescription of Dr. Castaing. But he did not tell the chemist that he was Dr. Castaing himself. An hour later, Castaing arrived at the shop of another chemist, Chevalier, with whom he had already some acquaintance. He had bought acetate of morphia from him some months before, and had discussed with him then the effects of vegetable poisons. On this particular morning, he bought of his assistant 36 grains of acetate of morphia. Later in the morning, Castaing returned to St. Cloud, a distance of 10 miles from Paris, and said that he had been out for a long walk. He found Auguste ill in bed. Castaing asked for some cold milk, which was taken up to the bedroom by one of the servants. Shortly after this, Castaing went out again. During his absence, Auguste was seized with violent pains and sickness. When Castaing returned, he found his friend in the care of the people of the hotel. He told them to throw away the matter that had been vomited, as the smell was offensive, and Auguste told them to do as his friend directed. Castaing proposed to send for a doctor from Paris, but Auguste insisted that a local doctor should be called in at once. Accordingly, Dr. Pigache of St. Cloud was summoned. He arrived at the hotel about 11 o'clock. He prescribed a careful diet, lemonade, and a soothing draught. Dr. Pigache returned at 3 o'clock, when he found that the patient had taken some lemonade, but according to Castaing had refused to take the draught. He called again that afternoon. Ballet was much better. He said that he would be quite well if he could get some sleep, and expressed a wish to return to Paris. Dr. Pigache dissuaded him from this and left, saying that he would come again in the evening. Castaing said that that would be unnecessary, and it was agreed that Pigache should see the patient again at 8 o'clock the next morning. During the afternoon, Castaing sent a letter to Paris to Jean Auguste's servant, telling him to take the 2 keys of his master's desk to his cousin Malassis. But the man distrusted Castaing. He knew of the will which his master had made in the doctor's favor. Rather than compromise himself by any injudicious act, he brought the keys to Saint-Claude and there handed them over to Castaing. When Jean arrived, his master complained to him of feeling very ill. Jean said that he hoped he would be well enough to go back to Paris the following day, to which Auguste replied,
I don't think so. But if I am lucky enough to get away tomorrow, I shall leave 50 francs for the poor here.
About 11 o'clock that night, Castaing, in Jean's presence, gave the sick man a spoonful of the draught prescribed by Dr. Pigache. 4 or 5 minutes later, Auguste was seized with terrible convulsions, followed by unconsciousness. Dr. Pigache was sent for. He found Ballet lying on his back unconscious, his throat strained, his mouth shut, and his eyes fixed. The pulse was weak, his body covered with cold sweat, and every now and then he was seized with strong convulsions. The doctor asked Castaing the cause of the sudden change in Ballet's condition. Castaing replied that it had commenced shortly after he had taken a spoonful of the draught, which the doctor had prescribed for him. Dr. Pigache bled the patient and applied 20 leeches. He returned about 6. Ballet was sinking and Castaing appeared to be greatly upset. He told the doctor what an unhappy coincidence it was that he should have been present at the deathbeds of both Hippolyte and his brother Auguste, and that the position was the more distressing for him as he was the sole heir to Auguste's fortune. The parish priest was sent for to administer extreme unction to the dying man. To the parish clerk who accompanied the priest, Castaing said, I am losing a friend of my childhood, and both priest and clerk went away greatly edified by the sincere sorrow and pious demeanor of the young doctor. About midday on Sunday, June 1st, Auguste Ballet died. During the afternoon, Castaing left the hotel for some hours, and that same afternoon, a young man about 25 years of age, short and fair, left a letter at the house of Malassi. The letter was from Castaing and said,
My dear friend, Ballet has just died, but do nothing before tomorrow, Monday. I will see you and tell you, yes or no, whether it is time to act. I expect that his brother-in-law, Monsieur Martignon, whose face is pockmarked and who carries a decoration, will call and see you. I have said that I did not know what dispositions Ballet may have made, but that before his death he had told me to give you 2 little keys, which I am going to deliver to you myself, tomorrow Monday. I have not said that we are cousins, but only that I had seen you once or twice at ballets with whom you were friendly. So say nothing till I have seen you, but whatever you do, don't say you are a relative of mine.
Monday, June 2nd was the day fixed for the post-mortem. It was performed in the hotel at Saint-Cloud. Castaing was still in the hotel under provisional arrest. While the post-mortem was going on, his agitation was extreme. He kept opening the door of the room in which he was confined to hear, if possible, some news of the result. At last, Monsieur Pelletan obtained permission to inform him of the verdict of the doctors. It was favorable to Castaing. No trace of death by violence or poison had been discovered. Castaing expected, as a result of the doctor's report, immediate release. In this, he was disappointed. He was placed under stricter arrest and taken to Paris, where a preliminary investigation commenced, lasting 5 months. During the early part of his imprisonment, Castaing feigned insanity, going to disgusting lengths in the hope of convincing those about him of the reality of his madness. The trial of Castaing commenced before the Paris Assize Court on November 10, 1823. He was charged with the murder of Hippolyte Ballet, the destruction of a document containing the final dispositions of Hippolyte's property, and with the murder of Auguste Ballet. The 3 charges were to be tried simultaneously. The act of accusation in Castaing's case is a remarkable document covering 100 closely printed pages. It is a well-reasoned, graphic and unfair statement of the case for the prosecution. It tells the whole story of the crime and inserts everything that can possibly prejudice the prisoner in the eyes of the jury. The interrogatory of Castaing by the presiding judge lasted all the afternoon of the first day of the trial and the morning of the second. The opening part of it dealt with the murder of Hippolyte Ballet and elicited little or nothing that was fresh. Questioned by the president as to the destruction of Hippolyte Ballet's will, Castaing admitted that he had seen a draft of a will executed by Hippolyte in favor of his sister, but he denied having told Auguste that Lebret had in his possession a copy which he was prepared to destroy for 100,000 francs. Castaing denied that he had driven with Auguste to Lebret's office on October 8th. Asked to explain his sudden possession of 100,000 francs at a moment when he was apparently without a penny, he repeated his statement that Auguste had given him the capital sum as an equivalent for an income of 4,000 francs, which his brother had intended to leave him. Coming to the facts of the alleged poisoning of Auguste Ballet, the president asked Castaing why. Shortly after the warm wine was brought up on the night of May 30th, he went up to the room where one of the servants of the hotel was lying sick. Castaing replied that he was sent for by the wife of the hotel keeper. This the woman denied. She said that she did not even know that he was a doctor. The medical evidence at the trial was favorable to the accused. Orfila, the famous chemist of that day, said that though the symptoms in Auguste Ballet's case might be attributed to poisoning by acetate of morphia or some other vegetable poison, at the same time they could be equally well attributed to sudden illness of a natural kind. The liquids taken from the stomach of Ballet had yielded on analysis no trace of poison of any sort. The convulsive symptoms present in Ballet's case were undoubtedly a characteristic result of a severe dose of acetate of morphia. To the young priest-like doctor, the ordeal of his trial was a severe one. It lasted 8 days. It was only at midday on the 6th day that the evidence was concluded. Not only was Castaing compelled to submit to a long interrogatory by the president, but after each witness had given his or her evidence, the prisoner was called on to refute or explain any points unfavorable to him. This he did briefly, with varying success, as the trial went on, with increasing embarrassment. Most serious was the evidence of Persily, Auguste's mistress. She swore that on one occasion in her presence, Castaing had reproached Auguste with ingratitude. He had complained that he had destroyed one copy of Hippolyte Ballet's will, and for Auguste's sake had procured the destruction of the other, and that yet, in spite of all this, Auguste hesitated to entrust him with 100,000 francs. Asked what he had to say to this statement, Castaing denied its truth. He had, he said, only been in Mademoiselle Persily's house once, and then not with Auguste Ballet. Mademoiselle Persily adhered to the truth of her evidence, and the president left it to the jury to decide between them. Witnesses were called for the defense, who spoke to the diligence and good conduct of Castaing as a medical student, and 18, whom he had treated free of expense, testified to his kindness and generosity. All these witnesses, said the president, speak to your generosity, but for that very reason you must have made little profit out of your profession and had little opportunity for saving anything. At the same time, Castaing found it impossible to prove that he had ever made a substantial living by the exercise of his profession. It was 9 o'clock at night when the jury retired to consider their verdict. They returned into court after 2 hours' deliberation. They found the prisoner not guilty of the murder of Hippolyte Ballet, guilty of destroying his will, and guilty by 7 votes to 5 of the murder of Auguste Ballet. Asked if he had anything to say before judgment was given, Castaing, in a very loud voice, said,
"No, but I shall know how to die, though I am the victim of ill fortune, of fatal circumstance. I shall go to meet my 2 friends. I am accused of having treacherously murdered them. There is a providence above us. If there is such a thing as an immortal soul, I shall see Hippolyte and Auguste Ballet again. This is no empty declamation. I don't ask for human pity. I look to God's mercy, and shall go joyfully to the scaffold. My conscience is clear. It will not reproach me, even when I feel. Alas, it is easier to feel what I am feeling than to express what I dare not express. You have desired my death. You have it."
The judges retired to consider the sentence. The candles were guttering. The light of the lamps was beginning to fade. The judges returned. Castaing was condemned to death and ordered to pay 100,000 francs damages to the family of Auguste Ballet. On December 4th, his appeal was rejected. 2 days later, he was executed. He had attempted suicide by means of poison, which one of his friends had brought to him in prison, concealed inside a watch. His courage failed him at the last, and he met his death in a state of collapse.